Welcome to Urban X Real Talk Fitness Radio News, where we don't just bring you the news, we bring you the trending news. We bring you the news you need to know, news to assist you in making healthier choices for yourself in the hopes that you will be successful in navigating the often murky waters of the health and fitness industry. I'm your host, Diaja. We'll be back next week with our series on aging, but today I want to share with you some thoughts regarding the other side of the climate change debate. About a week ago, the world staged a young people's march for climate change. Now, I personally don't care what side of the debate you're on, but I do care that you have an opportunity to hear both sides of the debate, something I believe the media is desperately trying to prevent the American public from hearing. So today, I'm going to share a lecture from the 48th annual Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Council, where they sat down with Gregory Wrightstone, a geologist, a self-described climate contrarian. He is also an author of Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. In his view, Earth and humanity are actually prospering, contrary to what we're being told. It is Tuesday, October 1st, 2019. Let's flow.
At the 48th Phyllis Schlafly Eagle Council, we sat down with Gregory Wrightstone, a geologist, a self-described climate contrarian, and author of Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know. Well, Gregory Wrightstone, very good to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Gregory, you are the author of the book Inconvenient Facts. Tell me about some inconvenient facts.
Probably one of the biggest one I see is we're told that carbon dioxide, we've got too much of it. That's the main molecule that's been demonized by the left. The Green New Deal focuses primarily on demonizing carbon dioxide, that it's driving temperatures that will then lead to catastrophic consequences. The carbon dioxide is actually a miracle molecule, and if we look, I'm a geologist, so I look at the big picture, and if we look at the big picture of carbon dioxide, we've gained, I'm not going to give too many numbers here, but we're a little over 400 parts per million. We've gained about 130 parts per million since the Industrial Revolution. But yet, if we look through geologic time, the average levels on Earth's history were 2,600 parts per million, 6.5 times what they are today.
Okay.
And also, if we look at back when the flowering plants, they're called angiosperms, first evolved, they're the plants we rely on for sustenance and food. It was about 2,500 parts per million. These plants originated at times of high CO2 levels, and they really need higher CO2 levels. We've dropped, this is the key point here, we've dropped 2,000 parts per million since that time, and now we're being told by AOC and Al Gore and the rest that 130 parts per million is dangerous of increase. This 130 part per million increase, and we've decreased 2,000. So we don't have too much CO2. We don't have enough. We're actually in a period that's CO2 impoverished. And I tell you, the other big takeaway that I talk about a lot is the benefits of rising temperatures and increasing CO2. What I see is an Earth that's thriving, prospering, and greening, and humanity's benefiting from that. And it's not even close, the many, many benefits of a prospering Earth and humanity. Because if we look in the rearview mirror of history, we look back the last 100 years, what do we see? By every metric, we're getting better. Longer life expectancy, we're having more food production year after year after year. Our food production is outpacing population growth. Our air is getting cleaner, our water is getting cleaner. We can talk a little bit, but we see that both droughts and fires are in decline. Things we're told are increasing. So humanity and the Earth are actually thriving and prospering, which is completely opposite of what we're being told. We're being told that the increase in temperature will lead to catastrophic consequences, and we just don't see it happening.
So how is it in your mind that a significant part of our population seems to be convinced that that is the case?
That's unsurprising, because there's been an unrelenting barrage day after day of them being bombarded by the mainstream media and the government sources that increasing temperature, and the temperature's increasing, according to them, because of man-made greenhouse gas emissions, and that these are leading to you know the litany: floods, droughts, too much snow, not enough snow, too much rain, not enough rain. increasing toenail fungus, and that's actually one that they said was going to get worse. It's every day. And I think people, as I travel around, I talk to regular people in the airports, and the just regular people, and I find people are thirsty for unbiased, unfiltered, basic factual data about our changing climate, and it's changing. And the contrary facts, they just don't know about climate change and global warming, and that's the perspective I bring.
So, okay, let me get this straight. You're saying that we don't have enough carbon dioxide. Are you saying that the carbon dioxide increase is a result of human activity, but it's not a big deal? Is that your case?
I'm called a science denier. Let me tell you what I believe.
Okay.
I believe that carbon dioxide is increasing. It's increasing primarily due to the burning man's sources. Burning fossil fuels is the main one.
Okay.
A little bit cement manufacture contributes 5 or 6%, which most people don't know. But it's the reason it's increased 130 parts per million is because mainly of our burning of fossil fuels. I also believe that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and that increase will contribute to the warming of the atmosphere. I would argue, though, that it's fairly modest and greatly overwhelmed by the same natural forces that have been driving temperature since the dawn of time. If we look, the warming trend that we're in right now, we know when it started. It was in the late 17th century, in the middle of what was called the Little Ice Age, the horrific Little Ice Age, I might add, because during that time, 50% of the population of Iceland perished. A third of the population of the world perished during that time. It was really between about 1250 to 1850. It was a bad time, and we've seen systematically, if we look back through human history back 4,000 or 5,000 years, each one of the other warming trends were always associated with bountiful harvests, rise of empires and civilizations. There's a tremendous correlation between the rise and fall of temperatures and the rise and fall of civilizations. Each one of these warming periods were great civilizations rose up. It was the intervening cold periods they had names like the Greek Dark Ages, the Dark Ages, and the Little Ice Age. They were horrific. These cold periods were always associated with crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. That's just opposite of what we're being told, isn't it? We're being told, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, it's going to warm up another 1.5 degrees, and it does that. We're going to have famine and death, and that's just not what we learn. We need to look back through history and see what happened in these other warm periods, and it's just opposite of what they're telling us.
Very interesting. So, so I think let me see if I got this right. You're saying humans are increasing the carbon dioxide concentration significantly. It does have some kind of a warming effect. It's not very big, but you would be perfectly happy with a lot more carbon dioxide and more warming effect.
Yeah, we see the many benefits of carbon dioxide for plant growth. It's Dr. Craig Idso and his team have evaluated in laboratory tests what a 300 part per million increase of CO2 would be. Well, that leads to, in the 95% of the crops that we eat, the average crop growth would increase 46% in biomass. In other words, the bulk of the crops. 46% increase in the crops. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing. That's what we should celebrate. And what we see too, there are other benefits of carbon dioxide. For example, probably the second behind crop growth and plant growth, trees are growing, prospering. Each one of these plants also use less water, and because they're of this, it's called CO2 fertilization effect. Plants are growing bigger, faster, and they're getting much more vegetation, but they're not breathing in and out as much. It's called transpiration, and by that's the second biggest loss, water loss that we see, or that's actually for the plants, it's the biggest water loss, because as they're exhaling, if you will, they're also exhaling the water.
Right.
So what that does is leading to a worldwide soil moisture increase, which in turn, these things all play into effect. This in turn is leading to a lessening of droughts, and actually, get this, your viewers will probably not have known this, but we're actually seeing a worldwide decline in forest fires. in the northern hemisphere.
So, this is where I want to figure this out. I would expect, based on these increases in temperature, that you would get, especially in areas that are already prone to desertification and so forth, to have an increase in that. So there's certain areas which would certainly be on the very much the short end of the stick of this, whereas the other areas might benefit in the ways you described.
What we see,
right.
It's counterintuitive. I get that. The warming temperatures, you would think, would lead to more arid and dry conditions. What we see is that warming ocean temperatures means more evaporation. It actually, there's agreement that this warming will lead to more precipitation, increased precipitation, which we've seen. And some will argue, well, that will lead to flooding, and it might in some cases. I'm not going to argue that it wouldn't. But the big thing is, the big untold story maybe of the early 21st and late 20th century is the greening of the Earth. If you go and look at what NASA has to say about this, NASA, according to them, up to 50% of the Earth is what they call greening. In other words, there's a vegetation increase. Less than 4% is what they call browning. In other words, a loss of vegetation. I'll take that trade-off any day of the week.
That's fascinating. What parts of the world are greening versus what parts are browning?
It's mainly the area. Well, there are a couple areas. One of the most fascinating things is the southern Sahara. It's an area called the Sahel. 300,000 square kilometers of the Sahel are turning into a lush grassland. People haven't lived there in hundreds or even 1,000 years. We've got people, animals, gazelles, even amphibians are moving back into this area. And it's not the only area of the world. These are dry, arid places. India and China might have the best. The arid areas there are incredible. The amount of vegetation we've had, the increase, it's stunning if you see the NASA photograph. And it's, again, I call it probably the greatest untold story of the 21st century and late 20th century is this prospering and greening of the Earth. And it's just opposite of what we're being told.
It really is so opposite that it's almost hard to believe, isn't it?
Yeah, well, don't believe me then. Just Google NASA, the two words, NASA and greening. That's all you need to do. And it'll pop up. And see what NASA has.
We'll put it up while we talk, in the video. This is very interesting.
It's fascinating. It's really a good story. I'm a contributing writer for the Cornwall Alliance, which it's a Christian group. Yeah. And they believe that we should use all of our resources for the betterment of mankind, or in their words, we use all of God's creation for the betterment of mankind and do it as good stewards. And that's not really what we're being told. We're being told, no, don't use our resources to better mankind. You need to not quit using fossil fuels that are actually lifting people out of generational poverty. There are people, estimate 4 billion people around the earth are living in energy poverty. There are 4 million deaths a year from lung disease from people cooking in their homes with wood, a lot of it dried dung, that could benefit from more electrification, propane, compressed natural gas, so they don't have to die an early death from this. What these people are doing that are pushing the Green New Deal and the Paris Climate Accord, they're destining billions of people around the world to continued generational poverty. I don't want that. We've been lifting people up out of poverty using fossil fuels by providing abundant, affordable, reliable energy, and no three of those words are associated with wind or solar. It's not abundant, it's not reliable, and it's not affordable. You're going to increase costs for everybody and make that electricity go away.
Yeah, we were just talking with Mark Schneider a little earlier today about how nuclear could actually be a very green technology done the right way, and with these next generation reactors.
Yeah, there is. If anybody thinks we're going to get more nuclear reactors developed and actually in place and producing electricity in the next 20 years, I mean, I think I like what he has to say, and I like the idea of nuclear, but there's so much opposition to it, and to get licensing agreements and get them in place. Maybe you can get one or two, but we've got people in the Democrat candidates. They're really in a competition to see who can deindustrialize America the quickest. That's really what it comes down to.
So it's not just the nuclear, it's also fossil fuels are actually the kind of the target, right?
Absolutely.
Of the Green New Deal proposals generally.
Yeah,
speaking.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Again, they're demonizing what should be considered CO2, which should be considered the miracle molecule. And what they want to do is rein in carbon dioxide emissions by cutting fossil fuel use. And by doing that, they're going to ban, just on Wednesday, the U.S. House passed 3 bills banning Alaska National Wildlife Development, the NWAR area, offshore drilling of Florida, and no offshore drilling on each coast. They're also proposing banning fracking. Some want to ban fracking on the first day if they take office, some soon after. But it's fracking and the combination of fracking and horizontal drilling that has allowed the United States to produce these vast amounts of really low-cost natural gas that are driving carbon dioxide emissions. And they should be thankful for that.
They're driving carbon dioxide emissions or reduction?
Reduction.
Okay.
They're driving carbon dioxide emission reductions in the United States tremendously. So what they want to do is ban the actual mechanism that's allowing us to cut carbon dioxide emissions, and it's crazy. One of the other things that I'll be talking here in just a few minutes. Title of my talk is Climate Change: The Deliberate Corruption of the Scientific Process, and I'm going to be going through some of the big climate lies we're being told, recent ones over the last 9 months or a year that I've exposed, and using the actual science, facts, and data to completely dispute and debunk these notions that they're putting out. One of the most recent ones was the UN had a report out 2 months ago that there'll be 1 million species that will be going extinct over the next several decades. Well, I went back and looked at the exact same data that they used to find that there's no such thing. That, number one, if you're going to have 1 million extinctions of species going over the next several decades, you'd have to have 25,000 to 30,000 species go extinct per year. You know what it's been for the last 40 years, the average? 2. Well, it's nowhere near 25. Oh, well, yeah, but we'll get to 30,000 pretty quickly. No, we won't. Because the extinctions, I looked at with the same data, extinctions have been in decline since the late 1800s. And they're getting better and better and better. We care about the planet and we're preserving those species, just opposite of what they're telling. And just recently we heard about the Amazon forest that is supposedly in flames and burning up. Well, I took a look at the NASA data. NASA data shows that 2019 fires in the Amazon are smack dab right in the middle of the average for the last 13 years. And it's just, again, it's completely contrary to what we're being told.
You're saying this is just media spin?
Absolutely. And what's surprising to me is they haven't done it every year. Because every year for the last several years, every time there's a forest fire in California, or a hurricane that makes landfall, or a tornado that takes out an elementary school, they blame it on climate change. Well, the Amazon burns every year at this time of the year. What's surprising to me is not that they're doing it, but that it took them so long to figure out that they could demonize this.
I see.
So what it does, there's a fire season in the Amazon, and it's all of these are intentionally set, mostly by farmers that they use that fire process really to invigorate their lands. It's an annual process. It's mostly grasslands, croplands, and ranch lands that they're burning off for the regenerative process for the next growing season.
Fascinating. So basically you're saying there's just a lot of false information out there.
What's interesting, probably the most shared image of the Amazon fires was from NASA, and they shared that. It was over 2 million shares that it had. What they didn't share was the caption that went along with it. The caption, if you go there today, this is from NASA, the NASA caption says that the number of fires this year in the Amazon is about average. Well, a week and a half ago, when I first looked at it, the actual caption read slightly below average. Okay. I think somebody got to NASA and said, we really need to sow fear and alarm, and slightly below average. Could you at least get it up to average? And this is a process.
Interesting.
We see this. I opened my book up with a quote from H.L. Mencken, and H.L. Mencken, just to paraphrase what he had to say, was that governments and institutions need to create imaginary hobgoblins of alarm, which are used to scare the population. And they need to frighten population to accept otherwise onerous and painful things like the Green New Deal or the Paris Climate Accord. Why in the world would the United States voluntarily accept something like the Paris Climate Accord that would completely be economically crippling to the United States? It would drive up costs, it would lead to less reliable energy, increased taxation, and loss of freedoms. Why would we do it? The only reason we would do it is if we're on the edge of this climate apocalypse edge. There's a precipice, and if we don't do something, we're going to take one more step off that precipice and fall into this.
Well, we've heard 12 years, right?
Yeah, well, I think what they meant to say was we have 12 years until they have to change the deadline for their apocalypse. Because we've seen, I document in my book, in the UN in 2005 talked about predicted 50 million climate refugees by the year 2010. Well, in my book I capture in the population of these four of the most at-risk islands that they had identified. Well, the population was exploding. People were moving, they weren't fleeing from those islands, they were moving to the islands.
Right.
Completely opposite. And then in 2015, the UN made exactly the same prediction. They said 50 million climate refugees by the year 2020. Well, we're almost there, and we're not seeing many climate refugees flying from these low-lying islands.
Very interesting. So, Greg, I something else has kind of been on my mind lately. It's that China, actually, very specifically, I think a lot about China, but China's emissions of CO2 gases are kind of off the charts compared to anyone else by, I don't know if it's an order of magnitude, but it's some extremely large amount. And the thing that just struck me looking at this is if China isn't reining in its CO2 emissions, then it really doesn't matter what others do anyway. Is that accurate?
Absolutely accurate. They're not reining it in, and they don't intend to. Neither does India. India, in fact, has been very very upfront about this. Prime Minister Modi has said, we're going to put our citizens ahead of the Paris Climate Accord. We're going to do what's best for the citizens of India, and what's best for the citizens of India is more coal plants. We need reliable, abundant, affordable energy to lift all these people out of generational poverty. And you're right about that. If we look using the government's own calculations, I've got my smartphone app. I've added a segment to it. It's called the Magic Simulator, MAGICC.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell you what it stands for, but
okay.
I use their own calculations on. Remember, I said that I believe CO2 is a greenhouse gas that's warming the atmosphere. I used their own calculations to figure out various percentages if the U.S. would reduce its CO2 emissions. And if using that, if the United States reduced 100% of its CO2 emissions, we would avert, are you ready? It's 0.07 of a degree Fahrenheit of warming by the year 2050. 0.07 of a degree. How many jobs lost is that worth? How many? I'll tell you how many. Zero jobs lost. And so we're going to avert less than 0.1 of a degree Fahrenheit by the year 2050. And meanwhile, China over here is thumbing their nose and just continuing to build power plants, and India as well.
Gregory Wrightstone, excellent to have you.
Thank you very much.